Hey guys, Zomfox here, and today is officially training camp day. It is February 24th, which means that training camp has officially started for the 2024 United Football League season. Now, that does mean some bad news in that this is the last position ranking video I will be doing heading into the training camp since, well, the day this is being posted, it is training camp. I will potentially do one or two more once we get right next to the season starting in terms of ranking starters. But this is the last overall position ranking video, as tomorrow, February 25th at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, my training camp power rankings video will be posted, which is basically being done primarily through all these rankings. So, today we're going to be looking at safeties. As I said before, in the last couple of videos, I want to get at least one of every single position group. I've done a receiver position on offense, the running back and quarterback position. I've done a front seven position, a special teams position, and now we are doing safeties, a defensive back position. Quick note before we get started, Q&A is coming out on Tuesday. It is Tuesday next week, so if you have any last-minute questions, put them down in the comments below. If you haven't seen any of these videos, the top right of the video, you can click to go to a playlist that has all the positions we've done before. Without further ado, let's get started with number 8, the Arlington Renegades. Now, just like with the DTs, there are some of these guys who might end up becoming cornerbacks and some corners who might end up transitioning to safety, as some of these positions, even on the depth chart, are kind of wishy-washy for where they've played their whole career. So just note that, and of course this is a training camp position ranking, so a lot of these guys will end up getting cut, traded, or, something happened to them. But number 8 is the Renegades. Now the Renegades do have one very solid safety when you look at it. Tenny Adewuzi is a very solid player. This was a guy who did have 2 picks this past season, 30 solo tackles. As being a safety, having those good solo tackles is a pretty big deal. It means that you're not letting guys get past you, or you don't need help. So, really solid safety. The issue is pretty much every team has at least one good safety. They don't really have a great backup. They have one of the lower amounts of overall total safeties on a roster with only 5 currently. And when you look at it, the other projected starter, I would say, is probably Jamal Carter, since he has some XFL experience as well. But he wasn't, like a full-time starter. He only played in a few games, if I remember correctly. But then you have guys like Miles Dorn, Jared Maiden, and Christian Morgan. All of these guys are basically spring football newbies, so they don't have the experience that a lot of these other players do, to where the Renegades coming in at 8 really shouldn't be a shock. They've got one really solid defensive back, but they're much better stacked at corner than they are safety, so they come in at number 8. This really isn't that much of a surprise when you actually look at it overall. They are pretty easily the weakest overall, but they still do have a single really solid safety. Now, coming in at number 7 is going to be the Birmingham Stallions. Yeah, this is the lowest they've been on any of these position ranking videos. Essentially, their biggest weakness heading into, free agency or heading into the drafts was kicker, with the loss of Brandon Aubrey, with him going to the NFL. But through the draft and all that, defensive back became a pretty big scare, and on paper, it is one of, if not the weakest position on the roster. Now, the safety position, Jojo Tillery, solid player, has been here, and they have a couple other guys who are decent. Now, James Wiggins only ended up playing a couple games this past season, but he did end up having 2 interceptions in those games, which does have, is saying a lot, but only 9 tackles as well isn't a ton. But again, safety, sometimes, it's best to not have tackles, sometimes it is. The fact is, though, is that once you get past those 2, again, you do have another solid backup, and this is a big reason why I do have them above the Renegades and TJ Carter, another guy that has spring football experience. Then you look at somebody like a Kenny Robinson. This is a dude who has spring football experience. Back in 2020, he was on the midseason All-XFL team with the Battlehawks. And since then, he actually parlayed that success to a stint with the Panthers for a couple of years. So he hasn't actually needed to be in spring football. So I think that while there's an argument this team actually could move up a spot, I think that 7 is a solid spot. Because I think that when you look at number 6, I think that 6 has a couple guys that have a decent amount of spring football experience, just like this team does, but I think that they're just a bit better off. This is pretty close. 6 and 7 are really close together. This is another one of those lists where a couple of these spots you could easily flip-flop. Putting Stallions at 7, but they definitely could be 6. But number 6 I have is the Brahmas. The Brahmas have a lot of guys that are kind of weird. Some of their best players they let walk because of them not really fitting in the system, or, they left in free agency or something, or they didn't protect them. And one of those was Cam Kelly, if I'm not mistaken. As now you look at it, and it's still a solid group. It's just not a top-tier group. Now, Bryce Thompson and A.J. Hendy, I'm projecting to be the starters. Will they? maybe. I would not be shocked if Jordan Mosley ends up being a starter, or even Vernon Scott, a dude who has NFL experience. All in all, a lot of these players have at least some XFL experience. It is very small again, big issue, only 5 guys on the roster, which is both a good and a bad thing. It's good, they have a lot of faith in them, but it's bad in the sense that if a couple of these guys end up not being as good as they thought during training camp, kind of stuck with them. But overall, when you look at him, I mean, Thompson was a starter for all 10 games, or he played in all 10 games, did have 2 interceptions. All 3 of them, him, Hendy, and Mosley, all were 30-plus tackle guys. I think that all in all, this is a pretty decent room. I don't think it's elite by any means, but it's solid. I think 6 is a good spot. Now, number 5 is going to be the Showboats. This is where we start to get to the top tier groups, or not really top tier, but higher end. The Showboats coming in at 5 as they're just pretty good. I think that when you look at it, they could be 4, but I think 5 is good for them. Kyrie Woods, really solid player, and Jerry Elder, really solid. Jerry Elder is coming from New Orleans, and he was really good this past season. He was one of the leaders in passes defended. He did have a couple interceptions. He had a sack as well and a TFL. One of the few guys to be able to say he had basically all those different stats, including a forced fumble. So he pretty much was one of the only guys to actually have a TFL, a sack, a pick, a fumble, and a pass defended. Or pass defense, really solid. And Kyrie Woods is a really good player too. Only played in 6 games, yet had 18 tackles, 1 TFL, and 2 interceptions. Now, I would not be shocked if we see TJ Green be a starter. He wasn't a huge impact guy with the Stallions, but he is a guy that was a former second-round pick, has 100 NFL tackles, has been in the NFL for a while, has a lot of pro experience. And as we've seen before, there have been times where the Stallions kind of misuse guys. Even though Skip Holtz is on paper the best coach in the league solely because he was back-to-back champions using backups, which admittedly were basically starters. But take Sage Surratt for an example. He was with the Stallions in 2022, did almost nothing with them, went to DeFilippo, became a monster. So maybe we see Green as a starter, but we'll see. And then another really solid backup, Christian McFarland, another guy from the Stallions as well. Really solid player. Was actually one of the league leaders in tackles. He was in the top 20 as a safety. 53 tackles is not bad. It's a pretty solid number. Overall, when you look at this is very clearly better than the previous 3 teams. Them and 4 are kind of close. It's just the top 3 are pretty obvious, but this is still a really solid group. Now, number 4 is going to be the Battlehawks. The Battlehawks have one of the highest PFF graded players in Quinterio Cole. He was one of the highest graded players with Seattle. I know PFF grades are, especially with the NFL this past season, we've seen that sometimes they're kind of out there and outlandish, but they still are overall a pretty reputable source. He was a really solid safety. And then Cameron Kelly. He is now with the Battlehawks. Really solid this past season. 2 interceptions. He did only have 17 tackles. He didn't have a ton of, stats on there. But when he played, he did have some good moments about him. Now, when you look at guys like Ben DeLuca, Drayvon Askew Henry, Nico Bolden, Anthony Cialfi, there are decent backups. Look, DeLuca has XFL experience. Askew Henry, while he's not the most memorable player on the Generals, this is a very much spring football veteran. Now, he's not a full veteran in the sense that he's been around since 2019, but 2020 he was in the XFL. He was with the Generals the past 2 years. So this is a safety that has a lot of experience. It's just that he was the second safety on that team, as that team had Shalem Luani. So he wasn't, the main star there. So I wouldn't actually be shocked if he ended up starting on this team. This is a really solid group. Again, I think you could make a case that the Showboats should be above them. It's close, but I'm putting the Battlehawks at 4. The number 3, we start to get to the big 3, and it's going to be the Roughnecks. Really underrated group. I talk about a lot about how insane their D-line is, and admittedly, for good reason, their D-line is unbelievable. But their DBs are pretty good too. Manny Bunch is an all-XFL or all-USFL player. Really solid player. 54 tackles, again, up there in the league leaders. 4 TFLs and 2 sacks and an interception as a safety is crazy. Then you look at Dayon Lake. Solid player as well. 30 tackles, 5 TFLs as a safety, and a pick. This is a team, when you look at it, you're talking about 2 safeties that both had a substantial amount of TFLs, if we're being honest. So for safeties, that's pretty good. That's 1 basically every other game. With the D-line they have, the pass rush this team could have, or the just run-stopping ability, is crazy. Now, their backups, Jeremiah Johnson, Javon Hicks, Markel Roby, are their backups better? Sure. Javon Hicks was a player that was on Cincinnati for a while, a really solid player on those teams. but naturally overshadowed by guys like Kobe Bryant, Sauce Gardner. As a Cincy fan, I can safely say that he was not the best player on that defense. No hate, it's just that that defense was really good. But when you looked at it, you thought of the cornerback duo of Sauce and Kobe much more than you thought of Javon Hicks. And so it still is a really solid group, but this one is mainly carried by the fact they have two legitimately great starters that fit with their scheme really well. And then you have a couple solid backups. Still, third place, really solid. Number 2 is the defenders. The defenders come in at number 2. They have an all-XFL player in Deontay Anderson who made it despite being on the Vipers, which that's pretty hard to do, being actually a good player from the Vipers. Yikes. Really solid player. Then you have a guy like Santos Ramirez, who this past season was pretty damn solid. He had a pick 6, 2 interceptions, 45 total tackles, half a sack. That's pretty good. DJ Swearinger, another one of those high draft pick guys, a second-round pick back in 2013, so he is much older. He has been in the NFL for a while. The fact is he hasn't really done anything the past couple of years, so he might end up being a starter. We'll see. This is a dude who's been on active rosters ever since 2013 up until 2020, so a lot of NFL experience. Over 400 tackles is a pretty substantial number when we're talking about this league. And then, of course, you've got your other backups. This is mainly a big 3 in a sense, I would feel like. Again, Monte Nicholson, another somewhat higher round pick, a 4th round pick. But this is a team that I think when you look at their big 3 safeties, if DJ Swearinger is able to, still play at a pretty decent level, the level he was able to play in the NFL for almost a decade, you're talking about a really good trio. Number 2 is them. Could I see an argument for the Gamblers above them? Maybe. But I'm putting them at 2. The number 1, though, is obviously Michigan. Michigan is number 1. There's no team, favoritism bias. It's just on paper, they are the best for one reason. They are the only team that has 2 all-USFL/all-XFL, or basically all-league players at that position. The only team. They have the 2 all-USFL 2022 safeties, Shaylin Luani and Bryce Tornaden. The fact that they got both of them is crazy, and they still kept some of their better players. But when you look at it, they got Adonis Alexander, who's been with the Breakers the past couple of years. Kai Nakua was really solid for them this past season, and he's back. And they have a lot of guys on their roster. The fact is, this is just overkill. They don't even need to have all these guys competing for a roster spot because they, at least on paper, have 4 of them basically locked up. But you're having this massive group, and this is one of the times I'd say having a massive group of guys is beneficial because you have 2 all-USFL players. You have a really solid player who's been with you. You have a player that was solid in New Orleans, and now you have a bunch of other guys that are fighting for a spot. The Panthers' safety group is easily the best in the league. Again, they're the only team that has 2 all-league safeties, so that's basically a done deal. The fact is that both Tornaden and Luani, even though they didn't get the honors this past season, they still are all-league players. And that's pretty incredible that they were able to get both of them. Even I talked about it in the dispersal draft videos, or the dispersal draft and super draft videos. That's insane that they were able to get both of them. So I think that's very obvious Michigan is number 1. It's hard to argue that, again, when you just have those 2 starters. But again, your backups aren't bad. Your backups are really good. So number 1 is Michigan, no shock. So that'll do it for the final position power rankings video, or final position rankings video heading into training camp. As again, today is the training camp day. Yesterday was the training camp, report to it. Today was the official date. Tomorrow is the power rankings video, the second United Football League power rankings video, and then Tuesday is the Q&A. So make sure you subscribe and hit the bell. We're getting really close to 600 subscribers already, which is insane. I have an update for the giveaway, as I talked about, hitting maybe 500 subscribers before the season started. I'd add something, and we blew that away, so be on the lookout for that in the Q&A video. If you have any positions you want me to, make a quick list for in the comments, I've done a couple with wide receivers where I've at least said the top 2 teams I have, put them in the comments. Again, I'm planning to at least probably do a starting quarterback ranking once we get closer to the season starting. We still have some things we're waiting to find out. Maybe I'll throw in a random position powering or position ranking video during training camp. I don't really want to since we're going to start seeing cuts and all that, but I might. But as always, guys, thank you for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe, and have a great night.